So let's dive into it. The history of the Conservative Party of Japan. So like I've said in the past, these are sort of they've been called a sort of an alt-right or a sort of a right-wing populist party. Is how they've been described by commentators. I've said before that them and Sanzito, these sort of new parties, are seen as sort of akin to Trumpian politics or reform in the UK. These sort of, or a lot of other movements like the AfD in Germany. These sort of right-wing popular movements that are springing up, sort of tap into right-wing populist energy, and they seem to be sort of on the rise generally through Europe and internationally. So they were formed in only September 2023, so a very recent party, so not long track record of entering elections. And they were formed by sort of online political commentators like Naoki Hyakuta, who, as I say, is a sort of who's been an online commentator and novelist. Now, their early sort of perception of them is that they sort of have a very strong online presence. I believe they've got a great number of Twitter followers. I'm not sure if this is currently true, but at one point they were described as having more followers than the LDP, which is very strong for like a newly formed party. So they've got a very strong online presence. Their first election was the Tokyo by-election in 2024, where they finished a strong 4th place, which is not too bad at all for a newly formed party, before they entered the 2024 general election. And as I say, they won their first 3 seats, which there have been new entrants into Japanese politics in the past who've entered their first election, won more seats. But in my opinion, 3 seats for a newly formed party, perhaps this is just my UK perspective, seems very strong to immediately be gaining seats there. And in the 2024 election, they were strongest, I believe, among middle-aged men. That's sort of the demographic where they did the best. And I believe of all the parties, they're quite male-centric in where they draw their support from. I believe 69% of their voters were men. So that sort of gives you a brief history of where they are. They're sort of this new party from 2023. Now they have 3 seats, and we'll see what they'll do in the Diet, whether they work with the LDP at all, or whether they you generally describe them as further to the right of the LDP, whether they look to oppose them and not in sort of cooperate with them, and to sort of push their sort of right-wing populist message, along with Sanzito, who are sort of a quite similar profile of party. Now their leader, as I say, is Naoki Hyakuta. We just talked about his controversial statements the other day. He's also had controversy in the past. I believe some years ago he made statements about the Nanking massacre, which is a incident that occurred in China, in Nanking, where war crimes essentially were committed by the Japanese army. He's suggested that they may not have happened, or looked to potentially undermine them, I believe, in statements he's made in the past, which have been quite controversial. He wrote a book called Eternal Zero, which I believe was also adapted into a film. And as you can imagine, from sort of someone who's a sort of conservative populist, it's sort of a sort of quite pro-Japan story. I believe, it's a sort of a pro-Japan story that takes place within World War II. And I believe there's been some people have criticised it for the way sort of it's portrayed, and sort of the way the history of it is told in that novel. So the book itself is about fighter pilots on the A6M0 fighter plane during the Second World War. And it's attracted some controversy, as I say. But the animator Hayao Miyazaki described it as a pack of lies, which is quite strong. But nonetheless, as I say, it was adapted into film, and that's sort of given him some literary and media success. And following that, he also became the governor of NHK, very interestingly under the LDP in Abe's term. He became the NHK governor. For those unaware, the NHK is sort of the equivalent of sort of the BBC, the national broadcaster. But it's very interesting that he previously supported Abe and the LDP, but then after being made to stand down from the NHK, he's since formed his new party, which has opposed the party. And I believe it was his opposition to the LGBT Understanding Act, which is a bill that was passed to sort of promote understanding of LGBT issues within Japan, and sort of education on that respect. That's something he opposed, and I believe he said if the act was passed, he would form his own party to sort of oppose those issues, which sort of led from his status as like a former NHK governor, sort of media person, online political pundit, commentator, to then form his own party. And so that was the thing that sort of triggered him to enter politics. And so from there, he's the policy of the to read off some policies of the general platform of the Conservative Party of Japan. So the things they believe in are stricter immigration, lower immigration, and more sort of restricted acceptance of refugees into Japan, stronger defence, and in particular they want to amend the constitution. And the constitution was written after World War II to sort of restrict Japan's ability to have military. Now, I'll go into this at another time, hopefully, but essentially it limits Japan not from having an army, but they do have a self-defense force. So they do have soldiers, tanks, etc., but they're purely for defense constitutionally. So they wouldn't. Japan has never entered since World War II what you would describe as an offensive war, nor could they join in with the coalitions of sort of peacekeeping or sort of international wars, like for example the war in Iraq. Now in Iraq, I believe they may have sent sort of soldiers to act as security or to generally support the Iraq war, but they didn't send active combat troops. And this is sort of has been under discussion ever since the Constitution was written, and I believe the CPJ support rewriting it in a way that you can actually have an active military, and you wouldn't be having to form this role where purely Japan's military is only acting defensively, so sort of unrestrict them to have potential offensive capacity. And I believe one of the reasons that's sort of seems quite controversial is Japan in the modern era can't enter into what you'd call, I guess, collective defense. Like if your neighbors invaded and you have a mutual defense pact, you can't enter in to defend them. And so that is sort of an interesting dynamic that affects only Japan because of their constitution. And so they would favor rewriting that so Japan can sort of strengthen its military and not be bound by that constitutional clause. Another thing they want is tax cuts, and to reduce the tax burden on Japanese citizens, and to reconsider and possibly restrict the size of the Japanese government. They also want to strengthen the economy through areas like agriculture, mining, forestry, and fishery. So it's essentially primary industries, rather than just manufacturing or the service industry. They want sort of a strong production of raw materials in Japan based on reaching those priorities. And they also want to promote very much Japanese traditional culture, and generally they favour sort of the strengthening of Japan and its character, is what they would say.
Now, since I started making this, the other day, a CPJ endorsed candidate, Ichiro Hirasawa, won the mayoral election in Nagoya, which is the fourth largest city in Japan. So I think it's worth highlighting the strong ties between Nagoya and the Conservative Party of Japan. The winner is the former deputy of the previous mayor, Takashi Kawamura. Now, Kawamura is now the deputy leader of the CPJ, having been the mayor of Nagoya from 2009 to 2024. So him endorsing his former deputy is likely pivotal in a CPJ-backed candidate winning Nagoya. In addition to being deputy leader, Kawamura is also one of the 3 elected Conservative Party of Japan members in the House of Representatives, and he's the only one who's there not through proportional voting, but by being the representative of a local constituency. He represents a seat in the Nagoya area, which he held before he was mayor. And if you look at the 3 seats they won, aside from the one that Kawamura won, his seat in Nagoya, the other 2 are seats within districts that border Nagoya, so the Tokai and Kinki regions. So effectively, the Conservative Party of Japan has been very strong within this region for some time. They've now won the mayoral election in Nagoya. So that seems to be quite a base of support for them, similar to how Ishin are very strong in Osaka. So it's worth considering this key role that Kawamura is playing in their ability to win seats and be a very strong regional party. And I think it will be very interesting to see if they remain this sort of regional local power in Nagoya, or if they're able to grow outwards from this base to sort of expand their appeal nationally beyond Nagoya.
So hopefully that gives you sort of a brief overview of what they're about, their sort of their history. As I say, in the 2024, I do believe they did reasonably well and won 3 members. So now they have a clear presence within the Japanese House of Representatives, and it'll be very interesting to see in the future what they do with that. But hopefully that gives you an understanding of where they came from, what the party's for.